George Herman is there inside the rotunda on Capitol Hill.
Walter, while the last strains of the hymn were playing outside, and perhaps you could hear them clearly, there has been in here all this time the most silent of silences, broken only occasionally by the click of the cameras, by the soft shuffling footsteps of the people standing here, and by the absolutely silent motion of the mixed guard, the honor guard, and the joint casket bearers. Total silence, all these maneuvers taking place without any word of command that can be heard, with rigid clockwork precision. A salute. The joint casket bearers now move out in the same impressive silence with which they entered. One of them carrying with him the folded plastic cover which protected the casket from the rain, protected its flag as it came through the streets of Washington and up the stairs of the Capitol. Once again, the head of the honor guard moves off silently, and President Nixon takes his place at the White House lectern.
Mrs. Eisenhower, Your Excellencies, friends of Dwight David Eisenhower in America and throughout the world, we gather today in mourning, but also in gratitude. We mourn Dwight Eisenhower's death, but we are grateful for his life. We gather also conscious of the fact that in paying tribute to Dwight Eisenhower, we celebrate greatness. When we think of his place in history, we think inevitably of the other giants of those days of World War II. And we think of the qualities of greatness and what his were that made his unique among all. Once, perhaps without intending to do so, he himself put his finger on it. It was 1945, shortly after VE Day, at a ceremony in London's historic Guildhall. The triumphant supreme commander of the Allied forces in Europe was officially given the freedom of the city of London. In an eloquent address that day, Dwight Eisenhower said, "I come from the heart of America." Perhaps no one sentence could better sum up what Dwight Eisenhower meant to a whole generation of Americans. He did come from the heart of America, not only from its geographical heart, but from its spiritual heart. He exemplified what millions of parents hoped that their sons would be: strong and courageous and honest and compassionate. And with his own great qualities of heart, he personified the best in America. It is, I think, a special tribute to Dwight Eisenhower that despite all of his honors, despite all of his great deeds and his triumphs, we find ourselves today thinking first, not of his deeds, but of his character. It was the character of the man, not what he did, but what he was, that so captured the trust and faith and affection of his own people and of the people of the world. Dwight Eisenhower touched something fundamental in America, which only a man of immense force of mind and spirit could have brought so vibrantly alive. He was a product of America's soil and of its ideals, driven by a compulsion to do right and to do well. A man of deep faith who believed in God and trusted in his will. A man who truly loved his country and for whom words like freedom and democracy were not cliches, but they were living truths. I know Mrs. Eisenhower would permit me to share with you the last word she spoke to him on the day he died. He said, "I've always loved my wife. I've always loved my children. I've always loved my grandchildren. And I have always loved my country." That was Dwight Eisenhower. He was a man who gave enormously of himself. His way of relaxing from the intense pressures of office or command was to do something else intensely, whether as a fierce competitor on the golf course or executing one of those hauntingly beautiful paintings that he did with such meticulous care. But even more than this, he gave enormously of himself to people. People loved Dwight Eisenhower. But the other side of this coin was that he loved people. He had the great leader's capacity to bring out the best in people. He had the great humanist's capacity to inspire people, to cheer them, to give them lift. I remember, for example, just a few months ago when I asked all of the members of the cabinet to go out and call on him. And each of them returned with wonder and admiration and said, "You know, I went out there to cheer him up, and instead I found he cheered me up." His great love of people was rooted in his faith. He had a deep faith in the goodness of God and in the essential goodness of man as a creature of God. This feeling toward people had another side. In the political world, strong passions are the norm, and all too often these turn toward personal vindictiveness. People often disagreed with Dwight Eisenhower, but almost nobody ever hated him. And this, I think, was because he himself was a man who did not know how to hate. Oh, he could be aroused by a cause, but he could not hate a person. He could disagree strongly, even passionately, but never personally. When people disagreed with him, he never thought of them as enemies. He simply thought, well, they don't agree with me. I remember time after time when critics of one sort or another were misrepresenting him or reviling him, he would sit back in his chair and with that wonderful half smile and half frown, he'd say, "I'm puzzled by those fellows." And he was genuinely puzzled by frenzy and by hate because he was incapable of it himself. He could never quite understand it in others. The last time I saw him, that was what he talked about. He was puzzled by the hatreds he had seen in our times. And he said the thing the world needs most today is understanding, an ability to see the other person's point of view, and not to hate him because he disagrees. That was Dwight Eisenhower. And yet, of course, he was more than all that. He had a side more evident to those of us who worked with him than to the rest of the world. He was a strong man. He was shrewd. He was decisive. Time and again, I have seen him make decisions that probably made the difference between war and peace for America and the world. That was always when he was at his best. No matter how heated the arguments were, he was always then the coolest man in the room. Dwight Eisenhower was that rarest of men, an authentic hero. Wars bring the names of many men into the headlines, and of those, some few become national or even international heroes. But as the years then pass, their fame goes down. But not so with Dwight Eisenhower. As the years passed, his stature grew. Commander of the mightiest expeditionary force ever assembled, receiver of the surrender of the German armies in World War II, president of Columbia University, supreme commander of NATO, 34th president of the United States, the honors, the offices were there in abundance. Every trust that the American people had it in their power to bestow, he was given. And yet, he always retained a saving humility. His was the humility not of fear, but of confidence. He walked with the great of the world, and he knew that the great are human. His was the humility of man before God and before the truth. His was the humility of a man too proud to be arrogant. The pursuit of peace was uppermost in his mind when he ran for the presidency, and it was uppermost in his conduct of that office. And it is a tribute to his skill and determination that not since the 1930s has the nation enjoyed so long a period of peace, both at home and abroad, as the one that began in 1953 and continued through his presidency. As commander of the mightiest Allied force ever assembled, he was the right man at the right place at the right time. And as president, once again, he was the right man at the right place and at the right time. He restored calm to a divided nation. He gave Americans a new measure of self-respect. He invested his office with dignity and respect and trust. He made Americans proud of their president, proud of their country, proud of themselves. And if we in America were proud of Dwight Eisenhower, it was partly because he made us proud of America. He came from the heart of America, and he gave expression to the heart of America, and he touched the hearts of the world. Many leaders are known and respected outside their own countries. Very few are loved outside their own countries. Dwight Eisenhower was one of those few. He was probably loved by more people in more parts of the world than any president America has ever had. He captured the deepest feelings of free men everywhere. The principles he believed in, the ideals he stood for, these were bigger than his own country. Perhaps he himself put it best again in that Guildhall speech in 1945. He said then, "Kinship among nations is not determined in such measurements as proximity, size, and age. Rather, we should turn to those inner things, call them what you will. I mean those intangibles that are the real treasures that free men possess. To preserve his freedom of worship, his equality before the law, his liberty to speak and act as he sees fit, subject only to provisions that he not trespass upon similar rights of others, a Londoner will fight, and so will a citizen of Abilene. When we consider these things, then the valley of the Thames draws closer to the farms of Kansas and the plains of Texas." Some men are considered great because they lead great armies or they lead powerful nations. For 8 years now, Dwight Eisenhower has neither commanded an army nor led a nation. And yet, he remained through his final days the world's most admired and respected man, truly the first citizen of the world. As we marvel at this, it leads us once again to ponder the mysteries of greatness. Dwight Eisenhower's greatness derived not from his office, but from his character, from a unique moral force that transcended national boundaries, even as his own deep concern for humanity transcended national boundaries. His life reminds us that there is a moral force in this world more powerful than the might of arms or the wealth of nations. This man, who led the most powerful armies that the world has ever seen, this man who led the most powerful nation in the world, this essentially good and gentle and kind man, that moral force was his greatness. For a quarter of a century, to the very end of his life, Dwight Eisenhower exercised a moral authority without parallel in America and in the world. And America and the world is better because of it. And so today, we render our final salute. It is a fond salute to a man we loved and cherished. It is a grateful salute to a man whose whole extraordinary life was consecrated to service. It is a profoundly respectful salute to a man larger than life, who by any standard was one of the giants of our time. Each of us here will have a special memory of Dwight Eisenhower. I can see him now standing erect, straight, proud, and tall, 16 years ago, as he took the oath of office as the 34th President of the United States of America. We salute Dwight David Eisenhower, standing there in our memories, first in war, first in peace, and wherever freedom is cherished, first in the hearts of his fellow men.
Receive the benediction. Unto God's most gracious care and protection we commit you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace now and evermore. And now may the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus Christ, that great shepherd of the sheep, through the blood of the everlasting covenant, make you perfect in every good work to do his will, working in you that which is well-pleasing in his sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen.
After the benediction by the Reverend Edward Elson of the National Presbyterian Church, for many years President Eisenhower's pastor, Mrs. Eisenhower on the arm of her son John, followed by John's wife, her daughter-in-law Barbara, leave the rotunda of the Capitol. Mrs. Eisenhower, who came in slowly, looking visibly tired, and walked quietly to her position here and stood silently throughout the entire proceedings, veiled but watching carefully what was going on. Mrs. Eisenhower leading the procession from the hall, and followed now by the official party, the family party, which accompanied her. And they will in turn be followed as this procession goes out, much as it came in, by the cabinet, by the distinguished heads of state who are visiting, by the honorary pallbearers, who are now the honorary pallbearers led by former Admiral Lewis Strauss, who was head of the Atomic Energy Commission, and the rest of the pallbearers, Dr. Milton Eisenhower among them, move off. General Omar Bradley standing straight and tall, but walking somewhat stiffly after standing here on this cold, hard floor all the time. The Shah of Iran. And now going down the stairs outside, the great monument stairs at the east front of the Capitol, and moving towards their cars, outdoors, as those who are still left inside begin the process of filing out the doors, going in inverse order. And as those outside file down the stairs and hunt for their cars, led by the military guards, here in the center of the rotunda, with purposeful activity all around it, behind the velvet ropes stand the 5 men of the Guard of Honor, the commanding officer and 4 enlisted men from the 4 services, the one lone wreath of the president, and the flag covering the casket as it rests on the great Lincoln catafalque here in the center of the rotunda. The members of the House and of the Senate and their wives beginning the bustle of saying goodbye to each other, congratulating each other, some they haven't seen for a long time. Some of President Eisenhower's great friends have come specially for this occasion, men who are no longer members of the Congress of the United States, but were welcome here. Former Senator Tom Kuechel, who was the Republican whip under President Eisenhower. The side on the House, the ropes on the House side had just been closed up when a guard led in and opened up the rope for Charles Halleck, who had been President Eisenhower's Republican leader in the House, and whom President Eisenhower had so strongly valued. And among those beginning to move out, it was somewhat of a surprise to see him here. Senator Richard Russell, who's been quite ill, but came pro tem President of the Senate, came anyhow for this great occasion. A man who had opposed President Eisenhower in some things and supported him in many. Senator Dirksen, Senator Kennedy, Senator Edward Kennedy, who stood close behind him in the front rank of the senators at this ceremonial occasion. Another former senator who had been a great supporter of President Eisenhower, former Senator Kenneth Keating, came also for this occasion. And now the senators move off in array back to the Senate side of the House, back to the Senate side of the Capitol. The members of the House still standing because the diplomatic corps has to move out on their side before the members of the House and their wives can move off. The members of the Senate go off by themselves, leaving their wives here behind them as they came in, because the Senate met briefly in ceremonial session before the senators marched over here from their side of the Capitol. The wives arrived first, many of them standing here for as much as an hour, and the wives now will make off quietly through the west entrance of the Capitol, many of them, to the stairway down so that they can get back into their cars. The same purposeful quiet which marked much of the period continues here. There is no sound except the soft shuffle of footsteps, a low murmur of voices, and many of the members of the House and others here who had served with President Eisenhower, walking quietly past the casket on the catafalque here, walking on both sides, taking a quick look, moving on quietly towards either the Senate side or back towards the west side and back downstairs out of the Capitol. Dr. Sevilla Sacasa, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, among those passing by the casket. Now we'll begin the long process of paying respects to the President here in the great rotunda of the Capitol, where so many other presidents have lain in state before, where President Lincoln was placed on this same catafalque, President Garfield, President McKinley, President Harding, President Taft, President Kennedy, and President Hoover, and now President Dwight D. Eisenhower. A long line of military and civilian heroes of the United States, our top officials, our great leaders, have lain here in state if that was the wish of their families. It is strictly a decision of the family. A president's wife, a president's widow, can decide where he shall lie, whether he shall in fact be honored in the rotunda of the United States, which is the right of presidents, or whether he shall lie, as Franklin D. Roosevelt did at the request of Mrs. Roosevelt, in the White House, or whether the ceremony shall be strictly private. Still, the two lines move past. Now the Senate line has ended, and a single line moves past on the House side. The House side of the catafalque, moving quietly past just beyond the honor guard and moving quietly down to the west entrance, west hall, in which lies the prayer room, and down the great stairs, many of them to the basement and out to their cars to leave the Capitol now that the ceremonial is over. Police beginning to form the lines and reestablish the ropes around the casket to hold the lines in good order as the long process begins. People thronging in now from the House side of the Capitol, coming through the long corridor that leads from the House of Representatives, coming in single file past the casket to cast a glimpse at it and then move off. And on the Senate side, all is quiet and peaceful. The ropes are put up again. The Senate side of the casket and the Senate side of the rotunda totally inactive. Now the bustle continues a little bit as the people not only walk past for a look, but as the cameramen who have been stationed on platforms at the west side of the rotunda here begin to demount their cameras, many of them hurrying off, some staying to see whom they may recognize among those who come to pay their respects, to get a picture of someone famous, someone who was close to the late president as he comes through the line. This will go on throughout the day. It will go on, in fact, until tomorrow at midday, when the president's casket is taken from the rotunda and brought down the stairs again, taken back to the National Cathedral for the final ceremonials, and then placed aboard the train for Abilene. This now, the final stage of this ceremony in the rotunda, the final and the longest stage, as the people of Washington, D.C., and those people of the United States who are able to reach the casket come by, many of them with small children, just walking by for a last respect to the children, last respects from the children to a man they never knew, most likely. Small children, many of them born after President Eisenhower was long out of the White House. Others who were just in school when the name Eisenhower began to enter their attention as they studied about presidents of the United States in their classes. But mostly, it is a procession at this point of the young adults. Young people come to see the old president, who is now resting in state in the ceremonial in the White House. You might expect that at this point, what you would see would be mostly elderly people coming to pay respects to a man who was so important a part of their life during the years of the Great World War, the Second World War, and during the years after that when he was the President of the United States. It has been said and claimed that President Eisenhower was a president who appealed to the elderly, to the middle-aged, to the settled people. And yet, as you look down the hall, as I do from my position here in the rotunda, as I look down the hall towards the house side where the people are coming in, what I see are young people, people in their 20s, people in their 30s, but mostly in their 20s, young people coming to pay their respects to the last remains of Dwight David Eisenhower, young people coming through the rotunda in this gesture of respect to a man who by their standards must have seemed very old. And as you look at them, as you watch them passing through, as you look at their solemn faces, as they move past the casket, you wonder how this man bridged the generation gap, or why he bridged the generation gap, what there is about President Eisenhower that brings the young people of Washington here to the rotunda of the United States on this unpleasant day when there has been so much snow, so much rain, when it is difficult to reach the rotunda because of the parking restrictions and the many police and all the official limousines which have kept cars and even pedestrians in some cases from their accustomed approaches to the capital of the United States. It is a difficult thing in a ceremonial occasion of this kind to get to the Capitol, to get into the rotunda, to see the casket of the President of the United States. But still, there is a throng, and it is predominantly, overwhelmingly, a throng of young people. I suppose it could be argued, if you were cynical, that it's only young people who could manage to make the trip, and yet one wonders, once again, one wonders what there was about President Eisenhower that brings them here. A moment's confusion in the line as Fishbait Miller, the doorkeeper of the House of Representatives, changes the order of march, gets the circle into a slightly shorter and tighter formation so that more people can move more rapidly past, because the hall on his side of the Capitol, the hallways of the House of Representatives, appear to be thronged with the people who are coming through. And still they come. Looking down the corridor once again, you can still see that it is filled. People are still coming, even as the technicians begin the process of ripping up the tapes, taking down the wires which have filled this hall. When I first came in, I looked around and I thought an unusual form of mourning. All the lintels of all the doorways are draped with rather tightly wrapped black sashes. And it took a while for me to realize that this was a marriage of the new and the old, a marriage of modern technology with ancient mourning. Walter, that is the scene as it's said at this moment in the rotunda of the House of Representatives, of the Capitol of the United States.
And so General Eisenhower lies in state until tomorrow afternoon. On January 17th, 1961, President Eisenhower delivered a farewell address to the nation in which he summarized his credo and his hopes for this nation. Here is part of what he said.
So in this, my last good night to you as your president, I thank you for the many opportunities you have given me for public service in war and in peace. I trust in that service, you find some things worthy. As for the rest of it, I know you will find ways to improve performance in the future. You and I, my fellow citizens, need to be strong in our faith that all nations under God will reach the goal of peace with justice. May we be ever unswerving in devotion to principle, confident but humble with power, diligent in pursuit of the nation's great goals. To all the peoples of the world, I once more give expression to America's prayerful and continuing aspiration. We pray that peoples of all faiths, all races, all nations may have their great human needs satisfied, that those now denied opportunity shall come to enjoy it to the full, that all who yearn for freedom may experience its spiritual blessings. Those who have freedom will understand also its heavy responsibility, that all who are insensitive to the needs of others will learn charity, and that the scourges of poverty, disease, and ignorance will be made disappear from the earth, and that in the goodness of time, all peoples will come to live together in a peace guaranteed by the binding force of mutual respect and love.
That was Dwight David Eisenhower's farewell address from the White House as he left office after his 8-year service as President of the United States. His body lies now in the rotunda of the National Capitol, as you have seen it placed there, brought from the National Cathedral today in a cortege that wound its way through the streets of Washington to this National Capitol building. Tomorrow, the coffin will be removed from the catafalque there and carried from the rotunda back to the plaza on the east side of the White House and placed in a hearse for a return to Washington Cathedral. The cortege arriving at the cathedral, the funeral service begins there at 4:40 p.m. It will be a short service. There will be 3 ministers presiding, music, of course. The coffin to be placed then again in the hearse at 5:15 for a trip to Union Station in Washington, and at 6 o'clock placed aboard a train for its 1,300-mile trip to Abilene, Kansas, General Eisenhower's boyhood home, where he chose to be buried and as his last resting place. In tomorrow's procession will be representatives of 76 nations who have come here to pay their last respects to the wartime leader and peacetime president, including crowned heads, heads of state, and heads of government. There are governors from many, if not most, of the states, and of course, official Washington and his old comrades in arms who are among his honorary pallbearers. This is Walter Cronkite speaking for CBS News, Washington.
This has been a special report from CBS News. CBS News coverage of the funeral of President Eisenhower will resume tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:30 Central.